Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from. My name is Megan Clark, and I'm the Chief of Administration with the Denver Office of the Medical Examiner, and I am joined today by Derek Coates.
Good afternoon, good morning. Pleasure to be here.
So a little bit about us before we jump into our Mythbuster training on why talking to families should never be simple or routine. Like I said, I work for the medical examiner's office in Denver. My background is in victim services and advocacy. I started that back in 2008 and have experience working with nonprofit, law enforcement, and now as a public health agency. Specifically to talking with the bereaved, I piloted a family advocacy program for our office in 2021. And since then have consulted with numerous agencies, helping them set up similar programs. I'll turn it over to Derek.
Well, kind of like Megan, my background has been in the law enforcement for the last 30 years, primarily working with victims of violent crime. I have had the occasion to work with our homicide unit throughout my career, as well as when I was with the Department of Public Safety when they had some traffic accident issues. My primary effort has been with the Sexual Assault Kit Initiative. That's where the majority of my training has come from. But recently, I took up a role as a trainer for the Utah Prosecution Council regarding the trauma-informed victim interviewing program that was implemented back at about 2016, 2017. And that became part of state law. It's required for investigators to go through that course to understand the trauma and how it affects people in their account of events and better ways to communicate with individuals who are survivors of trauma.
All right, so we do have a disclaimer here for you. If you work in government, you're probably well acquainted with these. So this presentation was prepared by Derek and I. The views and opinions that we express here are ours and ours alone. They do not necessarily reflect the Office of the Medical Examiner or Utah Department of Corrections or the state of Utah. So what we're hoping that you all will take away today is how using a trauma-informed approach when working with the bereaved is going to be beneficial, not just for you, but for those that you serve, your community. We also hope that you'll take away that treating death as simple and routine actually could have a negative impact on your relationships with your community, as well as the investigation that you are conducting. And then the last takeaway is going to be that family advocates, victim advocates are a truly valuable asset to have on any investigative team, whether you're under law enforcement or the coroner or medical examiner system. So we're going to get started here with just a couple of questions. If you all would take some time to please answer these, we would appreciate it. All right. So it looks like the majority of you have received some type of trauma-informed training, which is awesome. But 38% who have not, that's a little bit higher than I would like to have seen. And most of you felt like the training you received was not adequate to prepare you to work with the bereaved.
I think that could be pretty, no, I'm just thinking that's got to be pretty, I just think dealing with individuals in trauma is such a, it's an important thing, and practice is a lot of it, but I can see where these numbers could have impact that.
Right. And I honestly, I think that's why we're here today, and why we were asked to do this presentation, because it's such a crucial and important part of working with communities, working with people, especially when people are in high stress, high trauma, high needs situations. The last comment I was going to make is that number 3 does not surprise me at all. I think in Denver, we're really lucky to have advocates that work with our law enforcement agency who can co-respond with law enforcement on death cases. And now with our medical examiner's office, we have a dedicated advocate team here too, but that it's definitely not the norm. Derek, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about your experience with advocates or what that was like in Utah.
Yeah, and we've got some slides that'll be coming up in a little bit that I know will prompt some of that. However, so at Salt Lake City, I've always had access to advocates. I think that really is dependent upon your location, your access to resources, the capacity, and the training that comes around, is recognizing that advocates and the value that they contribute to a holistic approach towards either investigations or supporting bereaved in natural cause deaths.
All right. So we're going to get into a little bit of the nuts and bolts here. So I think the phrase trauma-informed care or person-centered approach is probably something that most people have heard. But when you really break it down, what is it that you actually mean by that? And what are you talking about? So when we're talking about trauma, it's important to recognize that trauma is really the subjective experience of the person going through that situation. SAMHSA, or the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, they define trauma as a individual trauma results from an event, series of events, or a set of circumstances that is experienced by an individual as physically or emotionally harmful or life-threatening, and that has lasting adverse effects on the individual's functioning and mental, physical, social, emotional, or spiritual well-being. So again, what one person sees as being a very upsetting and traumatic event, a different person might not see it in that same way. People can experience the same event and have a different impact, feel differently about that same event. So when we're talking about trauma-informed care specifically, it's really trying to shift the focus away from like what's wrong with you to what happened to you. It moves this back into the person-centered realm. And how you do that, shifting that focus is going to help you foster the core principles of trauma-informed care. A lot of those are safety, so physical and emotional safety. Are you creating a space where somebody wants to be vulnerable with you? Trustworthiness, transparency, empowerment, and understanding of cultural, historical, and even gender issues. So acknowledging the diverse backgrounds of the people that you're working with and understanding how that may impact their ability to engage with you. It may impact how they respond to the situation. And all of that is going to be normal. So when I think about trauma-informed care and some of the ways that this has really impacted cases, even just recently here in our office, we had a gentleman a while back, young male. He was found outside, looked like an overdose. We're pretty sure that was probably what it was. However, in our office, it is pretty standard to do an autopsy on those cases. So we did not know who this gentleman's family was at that time. Our exam turnaround time is pretty quick, so he had an exam the next day. And by the time that we found the family, it was only then that we were notified that he was Muslim. And so I'm sure many of you in this audience probably have Muslim communities where you work and live. And autopsies are not something that they believe in. They believe that those should not happen. So the family was quite upset. The family also had a distrust of government. And so they didn't trust what we were telling them when it came to how that exam was conducted with respect for the decedent and the utmost care. Being trauma informed, our advocates jumped in with the family when they came here to our office. We were able to connect with the Muslim society in our area, who we already had a standing relationship with, and they were able to act as a mediator between our office and the family. It took a lot of hard work and a lot of patience on everybody's part, but we showed up in a way that was respectful of their belief systems to the point that we could be. And I think in the end, they truly appreciated that. I don't know, Derek, if you've got any experiences like that that you would like to share.
I think, well, for me, the biggest thing when it comes to being trauma informed is just meeting those people where they are at. I think you bring up a really great point, though, that a lot of the people that unfortunately that we're working with, they may be unidentified initially. We don't know a lot about them, and it may take a little bit of work, but it's that patience. And then working, I see someone put in their chaplain groups. I know that the agency I work for, we had advocates and we had non-denominational chaplains. So it's just knowing what resources you have available to you, but also approaching people, one, as you would want to be treated if you were in that circumstance, with respect and dignity, but also caring for the privacy of the individual in question. A lot of times I found that just by being transparent about the process with families that don't have like this distrust of government and such, it's a great opportunity to show them that we can help, that we can provide the care, comfort, or support to help them move to the next part of their lives with this lost individual. But the big thing, I think, is just being open to that conversation and really actively listening to what their care's concerns are.
Yes, I think one thing that I would add to that as well is somebody's response to a situation is not personal to you as the professional. Usually, they're reacting to what is quite literally the worst day of their life. And regardless of their demeanor as the professional in the room, it's important that you still show up with the kindness, the compassion, the patience, and the willingness to sit and listen. There will be a time where you have to give information, but usually sitting and listening and giving somebody that space is going to get you further with those families than doing otherwise.
I couldn't agree with you more, because it's also going to elicit some critical information that you may not otherwise know, just by being available and them just being able to talk about whatever was happening with this individual in their life, or what the dynamic was in their relationship, or whatever was going on. You get more information by just being able to hear them explain or to talk about their experience.
Absolutely. And sometimes that means talking about things that have nothing to do with directly the case that you're investigating, and that's okay. That's really where that patience comes in.
So as far as the trauma-informed care, as I was talking about, listening to people where they're at in that moment, this is where what Megan talked about, where every person's grief is unique. You can't use a one-size-fits-all approach to people. You have to hear what they have as far as concerns, or what they are they're afraid of, or what they would like. And so with that, you have to have the tools to be able to meet them in that space. And so we want to encourage that fairness to that individual, the dignity and privacy of the individual that's passed. And we want to build that trust and cooperation with the family or friends or significant other to the person that's lost. And recognizing the symptoms of trauma is one start to that. There are trainings out there across the U.S. I know through Saki TTA or I don't know if FTCOE has some resources. And you brought up SAMHSA, and I think these are all valuable. They're good reminders to help better equip us to navigate those nuances in trauma. Like I mentioned, like here we have a mandated, it's legislatively mandated for people, at least in sexual assault investigations. But what I've generally found is that training translates to other cases. It's not just the trauma in one particular investigative set. It can go beyond that. But one of the things that I would bring up is having professionals such as advocates available to you allows you, while you may be aware of the trauma, to continue on with whatever work you have, because we all know that in these types of cases, there's like checklist after checklist of things that have to be accomplished and completed just for the documentation requirements. But at the same time, you've got real people that have to be worked with and incorporate into this process. And it can go a long ways towards their healing by having someone like, Megan Clark or others that are trained in advocacy and what resources or what other products, just talking to them, management or what would I describe it as? Basically, client management, just to keep them involved in this process. And you'll meet the needs of these people through your investigations for the families of the person that's passed. One of the things that comes to my mind, we had a case where unfortunately an individual, he passed away, and while the family was there, it just through talking to them, it was identified early on that they had very specific needs. This person who had passed away, he was of two-faith. He had come from the Navajo culture, but he was also part of the Catholic culture and religion. And so, we wanted to accommodate however best we could while conducting this investigation. And we knew that this was important to this family. And so they were included in that guidance. While they knew that we had our legal obligations, and they knew that we wanted to help them with their healing process, as well as to meet the needs and beliefs of their cultures. And so we ended up we found someone that they agreed or that they had brought in that could provide that dual service for this individual. And through that inclusion, the family was very supportive of our efforts and appreciated the fact that we were sensitive to their situation in meeting their cultural beliefs. And I just think it's just talking to people to understand what it is and how we can incorporate that into our investigations. That's just my general experience, is that people want to help us, but they want to be heard by us.
Exactly. I think when you turn interactions with families or the bereaved into just a checkmark box to fulfill, you really do more harm to everything that you're trying to accomplish and the families themselves. Unfortunately, here in Colorado, we have had numerous kind of high profile cases regarding funeral home directors and some of the activities that they were doing, some of the things that they should not have been doing that they were doing, that were incredibly harmful to families. And you know, the one size fits all, it just doesn't fit in any scenario, because when you're interacting with somebody, you have to think about everything that came before this interaction that you're having with them. And one of those funeral home cases was in Denver, and we had a director who was being evicted. And unfortunately, through investigation, we uncovered a body that was on his property, as well as 40 urns and numerous bags of cremains, both marked and unmarked. And so, going through the investigation and what we uncovered, what law enforcement uncovered, most of these deaths, there was it was pretty kind of normal or standard, as much as it can be. You're talking about like the body that was found, it was, you know, a natural death, but the funeral home director just never cremated this person. However, he did provide a bag of remains to the family, so they thought that this person had been cremated. And now here we are inserting ourselves into these people's lives years after these deaths happened. And that is, in and of itself, ripping open old wounds that nobody should have to experience. And I will tell you, 40 plus urns meant tracking down and contacting 40 plus families and approaching each one in a person-centered and trauma-informed way. And why that was important is because each of those urns, each one that represented a different person, represented a life that, you know, they had their own histories and complex upbringings, or, you know, relationships. And it's all complex. None of it is really standard or routine. So when we're talking with all of these families, you have to find a way to truly meet them where they're at. And I'll tell you, the holding space and just allowing people to talk about their experience is an incredible thing. We had folks who really, their reactions were everything from, you can put the remains down the toilet for all I care. They had a very tumultuous relationship with the person who had passed away, and frankly, calling them pissed them off. And that's okay, right? They get to have that experience, they get to have those feelings. And it's not for us to judge. And there were other families, a lot of families, who were just so incredibly mad and angry. And, you know, they couldn't believe that this person that they trusted to take care of the most important person in their life had done this to them. And so there were a lot of feelings there, and that's okay. They get to have those feelings. That's normal. It's not for us to judge or make comment on. We're there to hold space and normalize what it is that they're feeling and going through. 40 families was a lot of work. And I'll tell you, not a single one of them had the exact same reaction as another family. And again, that's just pushing a little bit more the importance of this person-centered and trauma-informed care approach to working with the bereaved, and reiterating that, you know, it's not simple, it's not routine, and one size is not going to fit all.
I think that's such a valuable lesson, and that scope of issue, I don't know how you manage that. So congratulations, and I'm sorry that it happened. The way that you said something that kind of struck me was because you reached out to all of these people individually, and again, in my experience with, especially with it comes to the Sex Assault Kit Initiative, I conducted well over 40 notifications, whether that was in state or out of state. and or with family members, because if unfortunately someone had passed in the time. And like you said, you kind of have to just listen to them. You're presenting them with some information, and that's what they want. They want information. Um, and then they may be mad. And most of the time, I would just say that my experience has been that people were like, they felt like they had been forgotten. So like if we have an individual or something that's just hadn't been identified for a long time. But what I found from that was just talking to them, and if necessary, a simple "I'm sorry, we let you down," and move, and how can we move this forward. Most people, that's what they wanted, at least in the experience that I had. um, just to acknowledge that it was a mistake, and then how can we make it better.
I would agree. I think that goes back to the accountability piece. When you work for government, you have to have extreme ownership and accountability for what happens. Sometimes that means taking responsibility for something that you had no part in, but you're still a representative of the agency that did whatever thing was offensive to the family. And so, yeah, you kind of have to own it, and being able to do that is going to get you so much further with your community and your families, because that builds trust, and you have to build trust in order to get cooperation. They go hand in hand with each other. So I agree with that, Derek. Okay, so give you guys maybe a minute and a half to answer these next set of questions, and then we can discuss. All right. So again, I think we touched on this at the beginning. Derek and I have both been fortunate to have advocates, well, and me be an advocate, but to work in areas where advocates are made available. 48% said they do not have access to advocates within their organization to help with that family support piece. Unfortunately, I think number two, how have advocates been used in your MDI cases, was like a short answer, so I didn't see those responses, but maybe we can discuss that at the end. We're going to have some time saved to have more of a interactive Q&A. And then, yes, 78% of you believe that advocates could be helpful to your investigation. So when talking about how to utilize advocates and why it's important to integrate those into your process, I know when Derek and I were preparing for this webinar, we had a lot of conversation and dialogue around all of the different things that advocates can be used for that you might not think of right off the bat, right? I know on scene, when you're talking about that immediate aftermath of a death, you're called out, you respond, and that's whether you're law enforcement or death investigator. And you've got upset people, but you still have a job to do. And so those advocates who can co-respond with you can really act as a liaison between you and the investigation that you need to remain focused on, taking your photos and documenting the scene, talking with other witnesses before you speak with the family. They can kind of be that liaison to keep the family mostly calm, provide them with information about who's on scene and why. And that is going to improve your ability to get information from them later. Derek, I don't know if you want to touch on that as well from the law enforcement side. As
Yeah.
you would go out, how that might have been helpful for you.
Yeah. So again, like Megan and I talked when we were putting this together, we kind of shared some stories, and I say stories, but it's just our experience. And I would say that in mine, it was I was always the initial officer, frontline officer, and while my agency had advocates, we weren't utilizing them correctly at the time. I see someone posted in here about advocate or in domestic violence. That's where they were mainly seen at. They weren't seen as a potential multidisciplinary approach, hitting through the different groups within law enforcement. It's only reserved for domestic situations. So often my role as a frontline officer was to do all of the initial scene processing, notifications, whether it's to the doctor that had last seen this individual, or helping to set up, or locate mortuary services where appropriate, or to coordinate with the medical examiner's office for the collection of the body and all of those services. And I had many of my supervisors during my career were very supportive when it came to death investigations, natural or otherwise, which was you take as much time as you need, as answer all the questions that you can answer, and help the family as best as you can. Someone mentioned, and we brought it up later, was the chaplain services. So oftentimes I would call in chaplains to kind of help, I would say, focus attention for the family that was on scene to allow me to continue on, but I would come in and out as needed because the chaplain acted as that initial contact. But oftentimes it was just me by myself having to do all of these things and juggle it at the same time. And so having someone such as an advocate on scene, or the chaplain, as my experience grew, would have been extremely beneficial if that was the standard protocol. Since then, we've learned a lot of lessons as a result of this. And as my career advanced into my later years, and again, as a famous person once said, when you know better, you do better. Knowing that your advocates were a team player, and the agency that I had employed 4 full-time advocates, and they responded anywhere in the state, and they weren't alone. They were always partnered up, like Megan mentioned, and they had full knowledge of resources. They could help with follow-up post scene shutdown, once you're off the location, answering those questions, helping get those documents, items that were maybe booked into evidence that could be returned back to the family. They really, advocates become a part of the family. They shouldn't be looked as, in my opinion, again, they shouldn't be looked at as kind of like that one-off. They should be incorporated into the full process because, like I mentioned earlier, it becomes a multidisciplinary approach to this, and you just want the most favorable outcome to this unfortunate soul that's passed on, as well as the family in their healing process. And for me, a big example that comes up was when we had an unfortunate situation in a traffic accident where there were several people that were in a car accident, and they died as a result of this accident. And it became necessary to the process of identification quickly realized that these individuals were from Mexico, and so they had no immediate family contact. Well, it was our advocate, working with the investigators, working with consulates, working with federal agencies. And so now you're talking multiple federal agencies and state agencies to help coordinate contact with family, to help coordinate that transfer of the remains back to that family, meeting them, and again, all culturally trying to be aware of what's going on and how to do that. Our advocates took on a big part of that, and I applaud them. I mean, like I say this, I couldn't do my job without an advocate because they help free up so much of that. They take up a lane in that freeway, and they know where to go and how to get there, and they really help make sure that this hope comes to a successful resolution. Again, if you don't have them, look at how you can get some funding for them.
I agree. So going back to my start in victim services and advocacy, you know, we're not talking about that long ago. 2008 is not that long ago. We, on cases that were not going to be investigated as a criminal incident. So I think it's important to differentiate between a victim advocate whose responsibility is to work criminal cases, usually because that's where their funding is tied to. They are required to be working on cases where you have victims who maybe fall under the umbrella of the Victim Rights Act. So those cases are different because we would work those back then as long as the investigation was ongoing. But back then, on something like a suicide, we had the staff to do a courtesy response. And so we would respond with law enforcement and work with the family on scene. However, once that scene investigation was done and that officer was leaving, we were leaving with the officer. We did not have the capacity or the staff to do ongoing follow-up with those families, even though they most definitely needed it. I mean, talk about like the worst day of somebody's life. If you could imagine yourself in their shoes, one day, few hours stretch of support is not enough. It's just simply not enough. So I feel very fortunate and lucky because I had seen the need back then for better government funded support for families going through really horrific and tragic circumstances where they were not going to get the same support as somebody who was going through like a homicide investigation, for example. So when I saw that the medical examiner's office here was starting a family advocate position internally, it was really full circle for me in so many ways. And I feel really privileged and honored to be able to now provide families the same type of services and support that 16 years ago was only reserved for families who were experiencing some type of criminal event. I just think we're really progressing in a way that we need to be because for all of the death investigators in this room, I'm sure you can think back to times when you probably really could have used an advocate because families have a lot of needs. And as a death investigator, you might be really, really good at investigating scenes and figuring out the how and why people are deceased. But you might not necessarily know how probate works or how to file a life insurance claim or where they need to go to get funding to bury the person that passed away. And those are all things that advocates in our office help with. We help people with all of their needs. It's a really holistic approach to supporting the bereaved. And I, again, just feel very privileged and honored that I get to be a part of this new way of doing things and get to see these types of support services popping up all over the country now. And I think that really is the direction we're going in. I would echo Derek when he said, if you don't have advocates, highly encourage you to start that conversation. No matter how small your agency is, how big your agency is, it truly can be done. It's a type of service that can be scaled down or scaled up based on need. So one last example that I've got just in terms of how advocates are helpful, but it also really highlights the community collaboration piece too. And building those relationships with your other inner city agencies is going to pay off in the long run. Playing nice in the sandbox will get you so much further than being siloed and only focusing on your internal processes. So not very long ago, it was actually this year, we had a 30-year-old male who had an apparent overdose. We were in contact with the sister. Our family advocate team had been in contact with the sister numerous times, trying to help her with next steps. 8 months later, we are in touch with the sister again. However, this time it's because her 3-year-old is dead. And at the beginning, it was unknown cause of death, turned out to be a natural death. It's just a really sick baby. But we had already built and established a rapport and a trust with her from the first experience with her brother's passing. The complicating factors in this were not just the 2 deaths, but the mom of the 3-year-old. She had an open domestic violence case that was actively going through prosecution, which meant there was a no contact order, protection order in place, preventing her from speaking with the 3-year-old's father, which was probably a good thing. Dad is kind of your typical DV offender. He refused to cooperate with us in trying to get burial in place, funeral arrangements in place. So you have a mom who lost her brother 8 years ago, or 8 months prior, now has lost her 3-year-old, has a partner, ex-partner, who was manipulative and abusive, and she's having to deal with the criminal justice system at the same time. And she's Native American. And so they have strongly held beliefs about ceremony and ritual and what needs to happen after somebody dies. I personally think the father was being obstinate intentionally to hurt the mom even more. But we were able to work with the city attorney's office who was prosecuting the case, the victim advocate at the city attorney's office, to really provide these wraparound services to hit this from every angle that we possibly could to support mom and get her all of the support that she needs. The contact with her has been ongoing. Unfortunately, she does have several other children, I think 6 other kids. So she's going to need a lot of support. Both deaths that happened are not going to be criminally investigated. So in a traditional setting, she would not be getting all of the support services that she is now receiving. I really just want to highlight that because I think it really hits on why advocates are so important in this process. We can do things that other agencies don't necessarily have the time or ability to do.
I support that. I went as far in Utah to get my certificate as an advocate for the state of Utah. It's not that I'm able to necessarily implement it better than another advocate. It just helped me to be more aware of what their roles and responsibilities are, and how I can also support them from the law enforcement side, because they have a job it's a very important job as equal to the investigative side of it, which is the support and hopefully helping that family in that healing process, whatever that looks like to them. So great example.
Absolutely. And honestly, I'm really happy to hear that you got your certificate in advocacy. I don't think you shared that with me when we were prepping for this,
Nope.
but I would love to see more people do that. That's phenomenal. And usually within your own states, it doesn't matter what state you live in, there is some type of certification that you can obtain. So if you're working with families, I would encourage you to try to find where those certificates are, where those classes are, and take them, because it's only going to make you better as a professional in this career field. So we only have a couple slides left, and then we're going to leave the rest of the time open for Q&A. But some important takeaways: the role that we all have as professionals in this realm really is a privilege. You are being interjected into somebody's life. They didn't ask for you to be in their life. They didn't want to be in this circumstance, and yet they are. And so that is a sacred space that we hold as professionals doing this work. And it's important to recognize that. The families are relying on you for answers. They're relying on you to lead them and guide them in a very unknown situation. And so encouraging you to do that always with kindness, patience, respect, and empathy. And then utilize your resources. If you have advocates, use them. If you aren't sure how to use them, talk with them, set up a meeting, figure out ways that you maybe share space where you could collaborate and approach something as a team rather than siloed and approaching it as an individual. I promise you it is going to get you so much further. And then, like I mentioned before, seek out training and education. It's only going to do you a favor, I promise. And to end this slide, hopefully what you have learned so far is that talking with families should never be simple nor routine. And people are going to forget what you said. They'll probably forget what you did, but they're never going to forget how you made them feel. So keep that in the back of your mind as you approach these families to have these really hard conversations. All right.
Hi, everyone. My name is Michaela Askleys. I'm a forensic scientist with the FTCOE, and I'll be moderating today's Q&A session. Thank you so much, Megan and Derek, for the informative and engaging presentation. We have quite a few questions, so let's go ahead and get into it. The first question we have asks, are there any levels of trauma-informed training, from introductory level to more detailed? And then a second question in kind of the same vein is, do you have any specific trainings on trauma-informed care you'd recommend? And then either one of you can take both questions.
Well, I can speak from my experience as an investigator. Like I brought up through the training, our state has a legislatively mandated trauma-informed training. It's geared towards sexual assault. However, it is a trauma-informed training, and based on the principles set up, say, by Jim Hopper, or what Dr. Rebecca Campbell has found over her time, or Dr. Julie Valentine here locally in Utah. What I have also found is that there are trained professionals in the legal field, like this prosecution counsel, that not every state has, but most states do, and they coordinate that type of training for their states. For example, I was working with the one in West Virginia. I work for the one work here. There's, I believe, in Texas that I had worked with. So they're out there. Feel free to I can connect you with our person who does our trainings here in the state, who can then connect you out as needed. I see someone has posted that the NCJTC has some as well. And again, I think that's an important part of this is the trauma training should be free. I mean, we need to be better and we need to know more. And I know that the guy that puts on ours, he traveled to Memphis a couple weeks ago to train them, and it was no cost. His company supported him going out, so it should be free.
Yeah. Thank you for answering that, Derek. Yeah, it's good to hear about the resources out there, but always a need for more. So our next question asks, are there specific phrases or approaches you advise to take when interacting with grieving families that would help create a more trauma-informed approach? And then kind of secondary to that question as well, someone brought up an example of some of the hardest death notifications they've had is kind of more of an unexpected reaction. So maybe the person was laughing or excited when getting that news. So in that situation, condolences weren't really getting to their level, but congratulations doesn't show a compassionate response. So what would you do?
So I would be happy to answer this one. Just being on many scenes and meeting with many families and hearing some of the things that you shouldn't do. So saying, I know exactly how you feel, never say that, because the truth is you don't. You might have an idea that this is going to be incredibly difficult for this person, but you do not know exactly how they feel. The other things I would stay away from, talking about spiritual beliefs or religious systems or anything that that person has not specifically shared with you is a belief system for them. Stay away from any reference to it. I think when people are having a truly a normal reaction to an abnormal situation, they might joke, they might laugh. And at those times, you can focus more on the logistics of what it is that you need to get done with them in that moment. So rather than focusing on their reaction, it can be a conversation about, so here's what's going to happen next. You're going to see crime scene arrive or whatever the next step is going to be, and just walking them through the logistics so that they know what to expect next. That is still being trauma informed and advocating for that person that you're working with. And for those of you who have been doing this for a really long time, I know it can be easy to become jaded or, kind of feel a certain way about certain things. I would just encourage you to always keep in the back of your mind how somebody is reacting to the situation truly could be normal in just a very abnormal circumstance for that person. Doesn't mean they're guilty of something, doesn't mean they didn't love the person who's no longer there. It just means that that is how they handle stress and trauma, and that's okay. As long as they're not hurting themselves and they're not hurting somebody else, their reaction is okay.
And from an investigator point of view, also using some trauma-informed question around phrasings, that's kind of a hard one because that can be individually based. But what I have generally found is there's 3 words that I orient my questions around. So tell me, explain to me, describe to me. So it could be, tell me about X, Y, Z, tell me about how you're feeling, help me understand what's going on, help me, just so I'm on the same page as you, help me. And that's, most people respond to those 3 simple, tell me, explain to me, describe to me. I call it, it's not my phrasing. I borrowed it from others who have developed it, but TED, it's a TED talk, basically. And that's the door, that's how to get through to questioning or to help understand what that person is going through. And it can even be sensory, it can be feelings. And I don't care if someone's mad, I want to hear if they're mad, but it helps me understand where they're at and how best to meet them where they're at.
So I
No,
know
that's
we
great.
only have 1 minute left, but just to tie on to that, vent and validate is going to be your best friend in working with people who are going through trauma. Let them vent, validate what it is that they're telling you they feel. That is going to get you so far.
Thank you. I don't know if you want to hold on just a couple more minutes for a couple more questions. I know we had quite a few. Um, One person asked, what are some guidelines you would suggest for an agency developing a protocol for how and when to talk with a decedent's family?
Uh, so repeat the first part of that question. I want to make sure that I have it all.
Yeah, absolutely. What are some guidelines you would suggest for an agency developing a protocol for how or when to talk with a decedent's family?
Developing a protocol for how or when to talk with a decedent's
Hmm.
family. I guess that depends on the role that you have within the agency, but if we're speaking about advocates specifically, uh, they are appropriate to be in every room that an investigator is in. The policy and protocol should be, if you're working with people who are going through hard things, you are serving them as a member of the public, you should have an advocate in that room. If you're interested specifically in protocols and procedures or SOPs, I think we're going to provide our contact information at the end of this. Please reach out to me. I would be happy to share what we have. I mean, the more people who could have this information and implement these types of services, the better. So just email me. I'm happy to share.
Absolutely. So yeah, unfortunately, we've kind of run out of time in our Q&A session. I'm so sorry for those if we haven't gotten to your questions. But yes, feel free to reach out to Megan and Derek with anything, any further questions or um, anything else they can answer. Thank you so much for attending, everyone.
As you depart, we kindly ask that you take a minute or two to complete our post-event questionnaire. The link will be pasted in the chat and also appear as you exit the Zoom room. Your feedback helps us improve our outreach efforts and continue to provide the best experience possible. Thank you again for attending, and we hope everyone has a great day.